On our last day, we'll spend some time at the Explorations in Antiquity Center in LaGrange, Georgia. This is a center that is jam-packed with many archaeological recreations.
Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful.
First, we'll be looking down the time tunnel. This is from this end to the other end. As time goes by, different worship structures change. This is the Canaanite Broad House temple. So you can see the benches to sit on. Here's the standing stone. As we look, you can see that there are all sorts of information about each one of the sites. As we look at this, you can see the benches where people would sit, the vessels that would store various things, the altar in front of the standing stone for burning incense. You can see the well where they might worship the gods of the underworld, and the altar where they would burn the sacrifices, and a place for draining blood. Next, as we move along, we come to the Israelite shrine. This one's modeled on the one found in Arad, with 2 incense altar on each side and 2 standing stones in the primary area. Notice all of it is plastered as opposed to just rough rocks in the Canaanite, and benches to sit on. Next, we come to the early synagogue. Notice the benches for sitting on each side as they would sit, study the scriptures. You would have a mikveh bath for ritual purification. You would walk down the steps, dip into the water, and then come out. You would probably have the 10 Commandments somewhere, and the Torah Ark would either be a cabinet like this or a hole in the wall. Lastly, we have the early Christian church with its altar. As you can see, it has a mosaic floor with a baptismal on the side. Next, we move into the building for the triclinium table, a 3-sided table where you would lay on the mattresses around and eat in the center. They could serve food from the center, as you can see here, and you can see a scale from this man in the picture. They would have shelvings for storing various products around the room. And this is another one, a smaller one found like in a Roman home. Murex were used for dyeing purple. You can see the various colors here. They'd be caught by the trap as you see on the right. And this is a goat's hair tent, the normal tent of the Bedouin. As you can see here, the camel's hair has holes through it whenever it's dry, and when it's wet it swells so it can let air through in the heat. And this would be a typical tent. The stools are here for Americans. They wouldn't have had stools. They would have tied things down to rocks like this and put rocks around the outside to kind of delineate the borders of the tent. Cooking would be over an open fire with a metal plate maybe to put bread on for cooking. There was also another type of tent with a fringe around it called a covenant tent. To make a covenant or to end a war in peace, you ate a meal together in this tent. Temporary sheepfolds were made by piling up brambles and sticks. Permanent sheepfolds were made out of rocks with brambles or sticks on top to act kind of like barbed wire. You can see that the animals were separated in separate places, and sheep on one side, goats on the other, and I'm here as the door standing where it would be. You can see here the manger. Some would be outside and some would be inside in the little stable that'd be there. You would come to this and crawl through the narrow, low passageway, go up some steps, and inside you would come to something that looked like this. On each side would be benches where you'd lay the bodies until the bones rotted away, and then the chamber on the right is where you would stick the bones to be gathered to your father. Next we come to a threshing floor where they would have a sled that would be run over the wheat that had rocks in it that would cut up the wheat into pieces, then it would be winnowed and sifted and put into bags for storage. Wells were placed to socialize and also to get you water for the day, so they were very important. The upright for crucifixion would usually be a tree. They were lazy and didn't cut a whole lot of wood if they didn't have to. Now we come to a first century tomb. You can see here the bodies would have been laid on a bench, and they would have been prepared. They would have been stuck in one of these little tunnel-looking things called coquines, as you can see here, the top taken off, until they rotted. And then they would be put into the little box called an ossuary with their bones. Next up is the wine press. The grapes would be put into the vats where they would be stomped on. The juice would run down the hole in the bottom into the collection, and then it would be strained through cheesecloth, and the bottles would be placed in a cool place for storage. The Hebrew altar was made with uncut stones and had a ramp that came up to it, not stairs, so you can tell them when you find them. The horns of the altar would be these cornerstones that stuck up, and this is where you would put the blood. Canaanite altar was approached by steps and was made out of cut stones with horns on each side and looked much different. The olive press consisted of long beams that were used for attaching weights to that could then be used to press the olives. The olives were placed into baskets set under the beam, and then stones were added. Each time you added a stone, the oil became coarser. Greco-Roman theaters were found throughout the area, and theater usually was the dramas of the gods. In a city market, you'd find places to weigh out grain. You would also find a standard center where you could check out your weights and measures to make sure that they are accurate and you're not getting cheated or not cheating others. This is a grain elevator. It'd have a top on it, and then you'd walk down a spiral staircase to the bottom to get your grain. Sometimes it'd be in bags and sometimes just poured in. The grain then could be milled either on a donkey stone or on a hydro-powered stone. In Roman cities, there would be many cafeterias where you'd have covered dishes that you could take out soups or vegetables or whatever you wanted to eat. And this is a Roman milestone that tells you how far it is to the next town and which road started in the... Next we come to a very important place, the city gate, which would be well reinforced to keep it from being attacked. The gate would have side chambers where the elders would sit and hold court, and where there would be markets. Buildings would often be on either side, and they'd have roofs made out of sticks covered in plaster to be waterproof. As you'd enter the gate, often there'd be a place for a king to sit and watch his subjects, or for them to approach him and ask for favor. Storehouses were found throughout the city, and you'd often have places for tying up animals that had brought in the stores. Last, we look at the excavation places. Here you could come and do some digs. Of course, it's all simulated, but still, it gives you an idea of what it'd be like sifting and working in an archaeological site, and this brings us to another end.